She walked into the lawyer's office wearing a faded trench coat, her head bowed, looking every bit the defeated housewife her billionaire husband claimed she was. Richard Sterling laughed as she signed the divorce papers without reading them, not asking for a single dime of his fortune. He thought he had won. He thought she was a nobody who would fade into poverty. But 3 weeks later, at the most exclusive gala in New York, the roar of a Gulfstream G650 jet engine silenced the crowd. As the cabin doors opened, Richard's champagne glass shattered on the floor. The woman stepping out wasn't the broken ex-wife he threw away. She was the unexpected owner of the very empire he was begging to join. This is the story of Eleanor Vance, and her silence was the loudest revenge of all. The air in the conference room of Sterling and Partners was cold, artificially chilled to a temperature that made Eleanor Vance shiver inside her worn beige cardigan. Across the mahogany table sat Richard Sterling, the man she had loved for 6 years, and the man who was currently looking at his Rolex Submariner watch with distinct impatience. Next to him sat Jessica Thorne, his public relations manager, though everyone in the city of Seattle knew she was much more than that. Jessica wore a crimson dress that cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, her hand resting possessively on Richard's forearm. "Let's get this over with, Elena," Richard said, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. "I have a merger meeting at 2. Just sign the papers. As discussed, you get the apartment in the suburbs and the Honda. I keep the assets, the stocks, and the penthouse." The lawyer, a man named James Caldwell, who had once eaten Christmas dinner at Elena's table, pushed the thick stack of documents toward her. He didn't look her in the eye. "Mrs. Sterling. Miss Vance. If you sign here, you are waiving your right to spousal support. You are also agreeing to the non-disclosure agreement regarding Mr. Sterling's business dealings." Elena looked at the papers. The black ink seemed to swim before her eyes. For 6 years, she had been the invisible force behind Richard. When he was a struggling developer, she had worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his permits. When his first company almost went bankrupt, she had sold her grandmother's jewelry, an heirloom from the 1920s, to float him the cash. Now, he was the CEO of Vertex Dynamics, a billionaire on paper, and she was an inconvenience. "She's reading it," Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Richard, tell her to hurry up. It's sad, really. She thinks if she stalls, you'll change your mind." Richard sighed, leaning forward. "Elena, look at me. We're from different worlds now. You're simple. You like quiet nights and cheap wine. I'm about to take Vertex global. I need a partner who fits the image. Jessica fits. You don't. Don't make this ugly by begging for money you didn't earn." Didn't earn. The words echoed in Eleanor's mind. She remembered the nights she stayed up proofreading his business plans because his grammar was terrible. She remembered soothing him through panic attacks when the board threatened to fire him. Elena picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive Mont Blanc. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw the water glass in Jessica's smug face, even though every fiber of her being wanted to. Instead, Elena Vance did something that terrified Richard Sterling, though he wouldn't realize why until it was too late. She smiled. It was a small ghost of a smile. She uncapped the pen and signed her name in a fluid, steady hand. Elena Vance. She flipped the page, signed again, and again. "I don't want the apartment," Elena said softly. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Richard blinked. "Excuse me?" "I don't want the apartment in the suburbs, or the Honda," she said, closing the folder and sliding it back to James Caldwell. "I want a clean break. No ties. I'll be out of the penthouse by noon." Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're leaving with nothing? You know you can't survive in this city with zero income, Eleanor. Don't be a martyr. Take the house. I insist, Elena said, standing up. She looked at Jessica, then at Richard. You said we are from different worlds, Richard. You're right. We are. She turned and walked out of the glass-walled conference room. Let her go, Jessica giggled, loud enough for Eleanor to hear as she pressed the elevator button. She'll be back, begging for a loan in a month. They always come back. Elena stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on her past life. As the metal doors sealed, the facade dropped. She leaned her forehead against the cool steel and took a deep, ragged breath. She had nothing in her bank account but $2,000. She had no home. But as she walked out of the skyscraper and onto the busy Seattle street, she pulled a burner phone from her pocket. She dialed a number she hadn't used in 7 years. It rang once, twice. Hello? A deep, gravelly voice answered. It sounded like authority, like old money and steel. Grandfather, Elena whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I'm done. I did it your way. I tried to live a normal life. I tried to be loved for me, not the name. But it didn't work. There was a pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken history. Did he hurt you, Elara? The voice used her birth name, not Elena. Elara. He broke me, she admitted, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. But I signed the papers. I'm free. Then come home, the voice commanded. The jet is already fueling in Teterboro. It will be in Seattle in 4 hours. It's time you took your place at the head of the table, Elara regarding the Blackwood estate. Elena wiped her eyes. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I'm ready. And grandfather? Richard is attending the Global Tech Summit in Monaco next month, isn't he? He's trying to buy his way in, yes. Good, Elena said, her eyes narrowing as she looked back up at the towering Vertex building. Make sure I have an invitation. The main table. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce was finalized. For Richard Sterling, life was a blur of champagne toasts and high-stakes meetings. With Elena gone, he felt lighter, unburdened by her poverty mentality, as Jessica called it. He was free to spend his money as lavishly as he wanted. He bought a new Ferrari. He bought Jessica a diamond choker. He was featured on the cover of Tech Monthly. You see, Richard said to Jessica one evening as they lounged on the terrace of his penthouse, overlooking the city lights. I was carrying dead weight. Vertex Dynamics stock is up 12% since the divorce news broke. The market loves a bachelor CEO. Jessica sipped her martini, scrolling through her phone. Speaking of the ex-wife, did you hear? James told me she's staying at a Motel 6 near the airport. Can you imagine? From this penthouse to a roadside motel. It's pathetic. Richard felt a twinge of guilt, but he squashed it down with a sip of scotch. I offered her the house. She played the pride card. That's on her. Forget her, Jessica said, standing up and smoothing her dress. Focus on Monaco. The Global Tech Summit is in 2 days. This is it, Richard. If you can impress Alexander Blackwood, the investment from his conglomerate could turn Vertex into a $1 trillion company. They say Blackwood is looking for a new heir, or a partner. He's old. He needs fresh blood. Alexander Blackwood, Richard mused, the name tasting like gold on his tongue. The Blackwood family was American royalty. They didn't just have money, they had sovereignty. They owned shipping lines, rare earth mines, and half of the real estate in Manhattan. They were private, elusive, and dangerously powerful. I've got the pitch ready, Richard said confidently. I'm going to charm the old man. By the end of the summit, Blackwood will be eating out of my hand. The Global Tech Summit, Monaco. The setting was breathtaking. The summit was held at the Hotel de Paris Monte Carlo, a palace of marble, gold, and crystal. The harbour outside was filled with super yachts, but the buzz on the ground was all about the airstrip. Richard and Jessica arrived in a limousine, stepping out onto the red carpet. Richard looked dashing in a bespoke Armani tuxedo, and Jessica revelled in the flashing cameras. "This is it," Richard whispered. "Look at the crowd. Everyone is here. Elon, Zuckerberg, the royals." They made their way into the grand ballroom. It was a sea of power. Waiters in white gloves moved silently with trays of caviar. Richard scanned the room, looking for Alexander Blackwood. He spotted the legendary figure sitting at the center table, the King's table. Alexander was in his 80s, sitting in a wheelchair, looking frail but sharp-eyed. He was surrounded by security and a few high-level executives. Richard adjusted his tie. "I'm going in." He walked up to the table, Jessica trailing behind him. "Mr. Blackwood," Richard said, projecting his most charismatic voice. "Richard Sterling, CEO of Vertex Dynamics. It is an honor." The old man looked up. His eyes were grey, piercing, and strangely familiar, though Richard couldn't place why. "Sterling," Alexander said. His voice was raspy. "I've heard of you. The man who just finalized a rather public divorce." Richard froze. He hadn't expected that to be the opening topic. He forced a laugh. "Ah, tabloid gossip, sir. A necessary restructuring of my personal life to focus entirely on business. I believe in cutting loose ends that hold back progress." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so? You view loyalty as a loose end?" "I view compatibility as key," Richard smoothed over. "My ex-wife was a wonderful woman, but small-minded. Not built for this world. You understand, surely. To build an empire, one needs a partner who understands power." Jessica stepped forward, beaming. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Blackwood." Alexander didn't even look at her. He checked his pocket watch. "You are confident, Mr. Sterling. I like confidence. But I am waiting for the chairperson of the Blackwood Trust to arrive. Nothing gets signed until she is here." "She?" Richard asked. "I thought you were the sole decision-maker." "I am retiring, Mr. Sterling," Alexander said with a dry smile. "I handed the reins over to my granddaughter 3 weeks ago. She has been away, living a humble life to learn the value of $1. But she has returned." Richard nodded eagerly. "A wise strategy. I look forward to meeting her. I'm sure we will get along famously." Suddenly, the murmur in the ballroom died down. The music stopped. A low rumble shook the windows of the ballroom. It was the distinct sound of a jet engine, but much closer than the airport. "What is that?" Jessica asked, looking around. The guests rushed to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbour helipad. A massive, sleek black helicopter, a modified military-grade Sikorsky, was descending. It bore the gold crest of the Blackwood family, but it wasn't just the helicopter. As it touched down, the door opened. "She's here," Alexander Blackwood said, a look of immense pride crossing his face. Richard and Jessica pressed their faces to the glass. "Who is she?" Richard muttered. A security team in black suits swarmed the landing pad. Then a woman stepped out. She was wearing a gown made of midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer like the night sky. It was backless, daring and regal. Her hair, which Richard had only ever seen tied in a messy bun or a practical ponytail, was now cascading in luxurious waves down her back. Diamonds, real, heavy, flawless diamonds, glittered at her throat and ears. She walked with a stride that commanded the earth to steady itself beneath her feet. Richard's breath hitched. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew that walk. He knew the curve of that shoulder, but it was impossible. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." The woman entered the ballroom. The heavy double doors swung open. Every head turned. The silence was absolute. She walked straight toward the king's table, her eyes fixed forward, cold and sharp as cut glass. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at Alexander Blackwood. "I'm sorry I'm late, grandfather," she said. Her voice was the same, yet entirely different. It had lost the timbre of apology and gained the steel of command. Alexander smiled. "Right on time, Elara." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He took a staggering step forward. "Elena?" She turned slowly. It was the first time she acknowledged him. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his panicked face, then sliding to Jessica, who looked like she was about to faint. "Hello, Richard," she said coolly. "Please don't call me Elena. That was the name of the simple housewife you divorced. My name is Elara Blackwood, and I believe you're sitting in my seat." The silence that had fallen over the grand ballroom of the Hôtel de Paris was heavy enough to crush bone. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of polite conversation, the soft string quartet. It all ceased the moment Elara Blackwood took her seat at the head of the table. Richard Sterling stood frozen, his hand still half extended for a handshake that would never come. His brain was misfiring, unable to reconcile the two images in his head. There was Eleanor, the woman who wore mismatched socks and cried during rom-coms, the woman who clipped coupons for groceries. And then there was this woman, Elara. Her skin glowed with the kind of regimen only billions could buy. Her posture was not just confident, it was imperial. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Alexander Blackwood grunted, gesturing to a chair 3 spots away from the head. "You are blocking the waiters." Jessica Thorne, recovering from her initial shock, let out a nervous, shrill laugh. She grabbed Richard's arm, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Richard, sit. It's obviously a joke, a prank. She's hired actors. Or maybe she's sleeping with the old man." The whisper was meant to be private, but in the dead silence of the VIP section, it carried like a gunshot. Elara didn't flinch. She picked up her crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon, swirling the golden liquid. She turned her gaze slowly toward Jessica. The look wasn't angry, it was bored. It was the look a lioness gives a buzzing fly before swiping it out of existence. "Miss Thorne," Elara said, her voice smooth as velvet but cold as ice. "I would advise you to be careful. The defamation laws in Monaco are quite strict, and unlike my former husband, I have the legal team to enforce them." Jessica opened her mouth to retort, but Richard shoved her into her chair. "Shut up," he hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. Richard sat down, his legs trembling under the table. He stared at Elara. "How?" he choked out. 6 years, Elena. You were a waitress when I met you. You drove a 2014 Civic. You lived in a studio apartment with a leaky roof." "I lived the life I wanted to live," Elara replied, taking a delicate sip of champagne. "I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for me, Richard. Not for the Blackwood shipping to Empire, not for the trust fund that rivals the GDP of a small country, just me, Elena, the girl who liked painting and cooking pasta." She set the glass down, the sound of the crystal hitting the table echoing sharply. "And for a while, I thought I had found it," she continued, her eyes locking onto his. "I thought you loved the girl in the beige cardigan. But you didn't, did you? You tolerated her. You used her labor to build your company. You drained her savings to fix your mistakes. And the moment you got a taste of real success, you threw her away like garbage." Richard felt the eyes of the room on him. The other tech moguls, the investors, the royals, they were all watching. He tried to salvage the situation. He was a salesman, after all. He could spin this. "Elena," Richard stammered, adjusting his tie, trying to find his CEO persona. "You misunderstand. Everything I did, the divorce, it was to protect you. The business world is cruel. I didn't think you could handle the pressure. If I had known you were a Blackwood, my God, we could have been a power couple. We could have ruled the industry together." Alexander Blackwood let out a dry, hacking laugh. "A power couple? You made her sign a divorce settlement that gave her a used Honda boy. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a trophy. And when you thought she was plain bronze, you traded her in for—" Alexander glanced disdainfully at Jessica. "Plastic," Jessica gasped, her face turning a blotchy red. "I am the PR director of Vertex Dynamics," she squeaked indignantly. "You are a liability," Ilara stated flatly. She snapped her fingers, and a severe-looking man in a suit stepped forward from the shadows. He placed a tablet in front of Ilara. "Shall we talk business?" Ilara asked, her tone shifting instantly from personal to professional. "You came here to pitch to Blackwood Holdings. You want a $100 million injection to expand Vertex into the Asian markets. Is that correct?" Richard swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. Yes, that's the proposal." "I've read your proposal," Ilara said, tapping the screen. "It's ambitious, but there's a problem." "What problem?" Richard asked, leaning in, hope flaring in his chest. If he could just get the money, none of this mattered. He could endure the humiliation if he walked away a billionaire. "The problem," Ilara said, "is that Vertex Dynamics doesn't actually own its own IP anymore." Richard frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Of course we do. I developed the code myself." "You developed the code," Ilara corrected, "while we were married. In the state of Washington, intellectual property created during a marriage is considered community property unless explicitly stated otherwise." "But the prenup," Richard interrupted. "I made you sign a prenup 6 years ago." Ilara smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "You did. A generic template you downloaded off the internet to save $200 on a lawyer. Did you ever actually read the fine print, Richard?" Richard's blood ran cold. "Clause 14, Section B," Ilara recited from memory. "Any assets created or developed jointly or funded by marital assets shall remain joint property until a formal separation of assets is agreed upon." "We signed the divorce papers," Jessica shouted. "It's over." "We signed the divorce decree," Ilara said calmly. "But we didn't sign a separation of assets regarding the IP. You were so eager to get me out of the office, Richard, so you could move Jessica in, that you had your lawyer rush the paperwork. You forgot to list the source code of Vertex as a separate asset. You listed the house, the car, the bank accounts, but not the code." Ilara leaned forward. "Which means, legally, I still own 50% of your company's core technology, and as a shareholder, I am voting no on your funding." Richard felt like the floor had opened up beneath him. "You can't do that. That code is my life." "And that life was kept afloat by my grandmother's jewelry money when you were broke," Ilara shot back, her voice raising just an octave, enough to show the fire beneath the ice. "Do you remember? 3 years ago, you needed $50,000 for the server costs, or Vertex would go dark. I sold the emerald necklace." "Yes," Richard whispered. "I didn't sell it," Ilara revealed. "I pawned it. And I used my own allowance from the Blackwood Trust to cover the rest of your payroll for 6 months. You thought you were a genius businessman, Richard, but you were being subsidized by your poor wife the entire time. The crowd around them was murmuring now. People were pointing. Richard Sterling, the rising star of Silicon Valley, was being dismantled piece by piece in front of the global elite. "This is insane," Jessica stood up, knocking her chair over. "Come on, Richard, we don't need them. We'll go to the competition. We'll go to Tech Corp." Ilara's eyes flickered to Jessica. "Sit down, Jessica. You aren't going anywhere. You can't tell me what to do." "Actually," Ilara said, glancing at a notification on her tablet, "I can. Because as of 10 minutes ago, Blackwood Holdings acquired the debt on your personal credit lines. The penthouse you live in? The one Richard thinks he pays for? You're 3 months behind on the association fees, and your credit cards are maxed out to the tune of $200,000. Jessica froze. "I bought your debt," Ilara said simply. "Which means effectively, I own everything you think you have. If you walk out that door, I trigger the foreclosure clause. You'll be homeless by morning." Jessica sank back into her chair, defeated, tears streaming down her face. Richard looked at the woman he had underestimated for half a decade. He realized then that he hadn't just lost a wife. He had challenged a titan. "What do you want?" Richard asked, his voice broken. "You want to ruin me? Is that it? Revenge?" Ilara stood up. The shimmering blue dress caught the light, making her look like a goddess of vengeance. "Revenge is petty, Richard. I don't want revenge," she said, signaling the waiters to finally serve the first course. "I want clarity. Tonight isn't about destroying you. It's about showing you exactly where you stand in the food chain." She raised her glass to the room. "To Vertex Dynamics," she toasted, "and to new management." The dinner was an agony Richard Sterling would never forget. He was forced to sit there, dissecting a lobster tail, while the entire room whispered about him. Men he had idolized, titans of industry, walked by the table to pay their respects to Ilara, completely ignoring him. He watched as Ilara conversed fluently in French with the Minister of Finance, then switched to Mandarin to joke with a tech mogul from Shanghai. She was radiant. She was brilliant. She was everything he had told her she wasn't. Every laugh she shared with another man felt like a physical blow to Richard's chest. He realized, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that he was still in love with her. Or perhaps he was in love with the power she radiated. With Richard, the two were often the same thing. When the final course was cleared, Ilara stood up. "Grandfather, I'm going to take some air on the terrace. Mr. Sterling, Miss Thorne, join me." It wasn't a request. Richard and Jessica followed her like scolded children. They walked out onto the massive stone terrace overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The night air was warm, scented with salt and jasmine. Below them, the yachts bobbed on the dark water. Ilara walked to the edge of the balcony and gripped the stone railing. She didn't turn around. "Do you know why I didn't tell you?" she asked softly into the night. Richard stepped closer, wary. "Because you didn't trust me." "Because I wanted to protect you," she corrected, turning around. Her expression was softer now, stripped of the public mask she wore inside. "My family, the Blackwoods. We have enemies, Richard. Kidnappers, corporate spies. Living as Elena Vance was the only time I felt safe. I thought if we built a simple life, we could be happy." "I wanted more," Richard said, his voice pleading. "Is that a crime? I wanted to give you the world." "No, Richard." Ilara shook her head sadly. "You wanted to own the world. There is a difference, and you were willing to step on anyone to get it. Even me." She reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old, worn at the creases. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. Richard squinted in the dim light. That's the note I wrote you on our first anniversary, on the back of a napkin. Ilara nodded. To Elena, my partner, my rock. When we make it big, I promise I'll buy you a castle. She read the words, her voice catching slightly. I kept this. Even when you started coming home late. Even when I smelled Jessica's perfume on your shirts. I kept this because I believed in the man who wrote it. She held the napkin over the edge of the balcony. The wind fluttered the edges. Don't, Richard said, reaching out. Elena, please, we can fix this. I'll fire Jessica. I'll sign whatever new prenup you want. We can start over. Think about what we can do with your capital and my vision. Jessica let out a sob from the shadows. Richard, how can you say that? Be quiet, Richard snapped at her, desperate. Elena, listen to me. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But I love you. Ilara looked at him, searching his eyes. For a second, Richard thought he saw a flicker of the old Elena, the soft, forgiving wife. Then, she let go of the napkin. They watched it drift down, twisting in the wind, until it disappeared into the dark water of the harbour below. The man who wrote that note is dead, Ilara said, her voice hardening again. He died the day you asked me to sign those papers without looking me in the eye. She smoothed her dress. Now, let's discuss the terms of your surrender. Surrender? Richard stiffened. You have a choice, Ilara said, pacing slowly. Option A. I exercise my rights to the IP. Vertex enters litigation. It will take years. Your investors will pull out. The stock will tank. You will be bankrupt and publicly humiliated within 6 months. Richard felt the bile rise in his throat. She could do it. She had the money to bury him in lawsuits until he was 90. What is option B? He asked hoarsely. Option B, Ilara said, stopping in front of him. Blackwood Holdings acquires Vertex Dynamics completely. We buy 100% of the shares. You want to buy my company? I want to absorb your company, she corrected. You will stay on as CEO. On paper, nothing changes. You keep your office, you keep your salary, you keep your reputation. Richard blinked. This sounded too good. What's the catch? The catch, Ilara said, stepping closer, her heels clicking on the stone, is that you will have no voting power. You will answer to the board of directors. And the chairwoman of the board is me. She poked him in the chest with a manicured finger. You will work for me, Richard. Every decision, every hire, every press release goes through me. You wanted a partner? Now you have a boss. She turned to Jessica. And as for you, Ilara said, option B includes a condition for you as well. If Richard accepts, I will forgive your debt. I will pay off your credit cards and your condo fees. Jessica looked up, eyes wide with hope. Really? Yes, Ilara said. But you will resign from Vertex immediately. And you will leave Monaco tonight, economy class. I never want to see your face in my boardroom or near my husband, excuse me, my employee, ever again. The silence stretched on the balcony. The wind howled softly. Richard looked at Jessica. She was beautiful. Yes, but right now she looked pathetic, mascara running down her cheeks. Then he looked at Ilara. Powerful, majestic, terrifying. He realized he had no choice. Option A was death. Option B was servitude, but it was survival. I accept, Richard whispered, hanging his head. I can't hear you, Ilara said. I accept, Richard shouted, his voice cracking. I'll sell. I'll work for you. Just don't destroy the company. Jessica looked at Richard, betrayed. Richard, you're just going to dump me? After everything? Richard didn't even look at her. Go pack your bags, Jessica, you heard the lady. Economy class. Ilara watched the interaction with a cold satisfaction. It wasn't happiness, it was justice. "Good," Ilara said. "The lawyers will have the paperwork ready in the morning. Don't be late, Richard. I hate tardiness." She turned to walk back inside, but stopped at the glass doors. "Oh, and Richard." He looked up, broken. "The jet," she said, gesturing to the sky where her helicopter had landed. "Next time you see it, don't stare. It's rude to stare at your boss's transportation." She disappeared into the golden light of the ballroom, leaving Richard alone in the dark with a weeping mistress and the crushing weight of his own regret. But Ilara knew something Richard didn't. The game wasn't over. She had him under her thumb, yes. But back in Seattle, there was one more secret she hadn't revealed. One that would change the nature of their new partnership forever. As she walked through the crowd, her hand instinctively went to her stomach. She had signed the divorce papers 3 weeks ago, but the doctor's appointment had been only yesterday. She was pregnant. And Richard Sterling, the man she had just enslaved, was the father of the Blackwood heir. The rain in Seattle was different from the sun in Monaco. It was grey, persistent, and cold, a fitting backdrop for Richard Sterling's return to the company he had built, but no longer owned. 2 weeks had passed since the night at the Hotel de Paris. The transition had been swift and brutal. Blackwood Holdings had absorbed Vertex Dynamics with the efficiency of a predator swallowing prey. The signage in the lobby hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. The security guards were new, men with earpieces and military postures, who checked Richard's ID badge with no recognition of who he was. Richard stood in the elevator, watching the numbers climb. He used to love this ride. It used to feel like an ascent to Olympus. Now it felt like walking to the gallows. The elevator dinged at the top floor. This used to be his floor, the executive suite. But when the doors opened, he was greeted by a remodeling crew. The walls, once a stark, masculine charcoal, were being repainted a soft, commanding slate blue. His massive mahogany desk was gone, replaced by a sleek, modern glass structure that looked more like an art piece than furniture. "Excuse me," a woman with a clipboard said, stepping in front of him. It was Ilara's new personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Marcus. "Mr. Sterling, your office has been relocated." Richard blinked, his briefcase heavy in his hand. "Relocated? But this is the CEO's office." "Miss Blackwood is the chairwoman," Marcus corrected, not looking up from his tablet. "She requires the penthouse suite for security and logistical reasons. Your office is now on the 40th floor, down the hall from Human Resources." The insult was precise and surgical. The 40th floor was middle management. Richard ground his teeth, his jaw aching. "Fine." He turned and took the service stairs down 2 flights, too humiliated to wait for the elevator again. When he found his new office, it was a glass-walled cube. It was nice enough for a VP, but for a founder? It was a cage, and worse, it was visible to everyone. The developers, the junior staff, the interns, they could all see him sitting there. They knew. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His login credentials had been changed. He had to request access to the main servers he had installed. At 10 a.m., a calendar notification popped up on his screen. Mandatory. Strategy alignment meeting. Main conference room. Attendance required. Richard straightened his tie and marched to the conference room. He expected to see the usual board members. Instead, the room was filled with strangers, Blackwood executives flown in from New York and London. They were sharks in bespoke suits. At the head of the table sat Ilara. She wore a tailored white suit that made her look like a blade of light in the dim room. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She didn't look up when Richard entered. "Take a seat, Mr. Sterling," she said, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the table. The foot of the table. The meeting was a bloodbath. Ilara dismantled Richard's roadmap for the next quarter. She pointed out inefficiencies in his hiring process. She questioned the budget allocation for marketing. She did it all without raising her voice, using data and projections that were far superior to anything Richard had ever prepared. Richard sat there, stunned. He realized then that Elena hadn't just been proofreading his business plans all those years. She had been fixing them. She understood this business better than he did. "The Asian expansion is paused," Ilara announced, closing a file. "The market is too volatile. Instead, we are pivoting to defense contracts. I have secured a meeting with the Pentagon next week." Richard spoke up, unable to help himself. "Defense? Vertex is a consumer software company. We make apps. We don't do military-grade encryption." Ilara looked down the long table at him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable pools. "We do now, unless you doubt my ability to secure the contracts." No," Richard stammered. "I just think it's a departure from our brand identity." "Your brand identity," Ilara said icily, "was built on smoke and mirrors. I am building a fortress. If you can't handle the pivot, Mr. Sterling, I'm sure we can find a CEO who can." The threat hung in the air. Suddenly, Ilara's face went pale. She brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes widening slightly. It was a micro-expression, gone in an instant, but Richard saw it. She looked sick. "We will reconvene in 10 minutes, Ilara said abruptly, standing up. "I need to take a call." She hurried out of the room, her movements uncharacteristically rushed. Richard watched her go. He felt a strange mixture of concern and suspicion. Elena never got sick. She had an immune system of steel. In 6 years of marriage, he had seen her with a cold exactly once. He stood up and walked into the hallway, ostensibly to get coffee, but really to see where she went. He saw her disappear into her private executive bathroom. The door clicked locked. He stood there for a moment, listening. He couldn't hear anything over the hum of the office AC, but when she emerged 5 minutes later, she looked different. She had reapplied her lipstick, but her skin was clammy, and there was a sheen of sweat on her forehead. She saw him standing there. For a second, the mask slipped. She looked tired, vulnerable. "What do you want, Richard?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Are you okay?" he asked, and to his surprise, he meant it. "You look pale." "I'm fine," she snapped, straightening her jacket. "Just jet lag, and perhaps an allergy to incompetence." She brushed past him, smelling of mints and expensive perfume. Richard watched her walk away. He felt a pang of longing so sharp it almost brought him to his knees. He missed her. He missed the way she used to make him tea when he was stressed. He missed the way she would curl up on the couch while he worked. He had traded that warmth for a cold, empty ambition, and now he was drowning in it. He went back to his glass cage on the 40th floor. He spent the rest of the day reviewing the new defense protocols Ilara had sent over. They were brilliant, complex, revolutionary. At 8 p.m. the office was mostly empty. Richard was packing up to leave when he saw a shadow by the elevators. He squinted. Jessica. It couldn't be. Jessica Thorne was supposed to be in Nebraska, or wherever people with ruined reputations went. But there she was, standing in the lobby of the 40th floor, wearing a hooded raincoat and sunglasses. Richard walked over to her, looking around nervously. "What are you doing here? If security sees you..." "Security won't see me," Jessica hissed, pulling down her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, frantic. She looked nothing like the polished PR queen of a month ago. "I used my old keycard. They deactivated it, but I know the back door code to the service lift. You never changed it, did you? You're so lazy with security, Richard." "Get out," Richard whispered. "Elara bought your debt. She gave you a clean slate. Don't blow it." "She ruined me," Jessica spat. "A clean slate? She blacklisted me, Richard. I can't get a job anywhere. I went to Tech Corp. I went to Innovate. The moment they hear my name, they show me the door. The Blackwood influence is everywhere. She's starving me out." "That's not my problem," Richard said, turning away. "You wanted the high life, Jessica. You gambled and lost." "I have something," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I have something that can bring her down. And if you help me, we can take back the company." Richard stopped. He should have kept walking. He should have called the guards. But the desperation in him, the part of him that hated being a subordinate, made him pause. "What do you have?" Jessica smiled, a crooked, manic expression. "I went through the old files, the physical ones you kept in the storage unit, the ones from before you met Eleanor. I found the original incorporation papers for Vertex." So, Jessica stepped closer. "You listed a co-founder on the original draft, a man named David Chen. Whatever happened to him?" Richard's blood went cold. David Chen, his college roommate, the genius coder who had actually written the kernel for the Vertex algorithm before dying in a car accident 10 years ago. "He died," Richard said stiffly. "Yes, but his estate didn't," Jessica whispered. "You never bought out his share, Richard. You just erased his name from the paperwork when you filed. That's fraud. If that comes out, the IP doesn't belong to you or Elena. It belongs to David's 70-year-old mother in Ohio." Richard felt sick. If you leak that, the company collapses. The stock goes to zero. "I go to jail." "Not if we use it as leverage," Jessica said. "We go to Elara. We threaten to expose the fraud unless she signs the company back over to you. She can't risk a federal investigation. The Blackwood name can't handle a fraud scandal." Richard looked at Jessica. He saw the greed, the pettiness, the total lack of morality. It was like looking in a mirror at his past self. "No," Richard said. Jessica blinked. "What?" "No," Richard repeated, louder. "I'm not doing it. Elara, she's building something real here. I'm not going to burn it down to save my own skin." "You coward," Jessica hissed. "You're in love with her. After she gelded you in front of the whole world, you're still pining for her." "Security," Richard shouted, his voice echoing through the empty floor. Jessica's eyes went wide. She scrambled back toward the service elevator. "You'll regret this, Richard, both of you. I don't need you to leak it. I'll do it myself." The doors closed just as 2 guards came running around the corner. "Mr. Sterling?" one guard asked. "Is everything all right?" "No," Richard said, his heart hammering. "We have a breach, and I need to speak to the chairwoman immediately." Richard burst into the penthouse office, bypassing the security detail with a desperate shout about a security breach. But the words died in his throat when he saw Elara. She wasn't working. She was slumped on the leather sofa, her head in her hands, trembling violently. A trash can was pulled close to her knees, and her skin was a terrifying shade of grey. "Elena?" Richard rushed to her side, forgetting titles and animosity. She looked up, her eyes glassy. "Richard, how did you get in here?" "Jessica was here," Richard said quickly, kneeling beside her. "She knows about the David Chen fraud. She's going to leak it. We need legal." He stopped, noticing her hand, clutching her stomach. "You're burning up. I'm calling an ambulance." "No!" Elara tried to push him away. "No doctors. The press." "To hell with the press." Richard scooped her into his arms. She was alarmingly light. You're my boss and you're sick. We're going." He carried her past the stunned security team. "Get the car. Swedish Medical Center. Now." Swedish Medical Center, VIP wing. An hour later, Dr. Aris stepped into the silent waiting room. He looked grave. "Mr. Sterling? She is stable. It was severe dehydration and exhaustion. But she needs to stop working immediately. In her condition, this level of stress is life-threatening." "Her condition?" Richard frowned. "Is it a virus?" The doctor paused. "I assumed you knew. Ms. Blackwood is 12 weeks pregnant. The stress caused a placental abruption scare. She almost lost the baby." The world stopped spinning. 12 weeks. That meant the baby was conceived before the divorce, before the papers, before the betrayal. Richard walked into the dimly lit hospital room like a ghost. Ilara lay in the bed, looking small against the white sheets. The heart monitor beeped rhythmically, the sound of 2 lives. "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard whispered, standing by the bed. Ilara turned away, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Because I didn't want my child to be a pawn. I didn't want you to fight for custody just to control the Blackwood Trust." "Is that what you think of me?" Richard asked, his voice breaking. "That I'd treat our child like an asset?" "You treated me like an asset," she countered weakly. "You threw me away for a stock price." Richard closed his eyes. She was right. He had destroyed everything. "I know, but Jessica knows about the fraud. She's going to use it to blackmail us. She'll destroy the company, Elena. Your company. Our child's legacy." Ilara's hand went protectively to her stomach. "What can we do?" "I'm going to stop her," Richard vowed, a dark determination settling over him. "I'm going to the SEC tomorrow. I'll confess to falsifying the documents. I'll take the fall. It will validate the company and invalidate her blackmail." "Richard, you'll go to prison," Ilara whispered. "I know," he said, gently squeezing her hand. "But it gives you a clean slate. Take care of the baby." He kissed her forehead, a goodbye, and walked out before she could stop him. Richard stepped out of the hospital into the rainy night, ready to ruin his life to save hers. But his phone buzzed. "Going to play the hero, Richard?" Jessica's voice cackled. "I saw you leave, but you're too late. I've already queued the documents for the press." Richard stopped on the sidewalk. "Don't do it." "Get in the black van, pulling up to the curb," she commanded. "We're going to negotiate a new settlement, one that involves the Blackwood heir." A van screeched to a halt. The door slid open to reveal 2 thugs and a smiling Jessica. Richard looked back at the hospital window, where Ilara lay, then at the van. He knew he might not come back. He stepped inside. The rusted warehouse smelled of gasoline and desperation. Richard was shoved into a chair, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Across from him, Jessica Thorne paced like a caged animal, a pistol in one hand and a tablet in the other. "It's simple, Richard," Jessica hissed, signaling her hired thugs to set up a retinal scanner on the wobbly table. "You authorize a transfer of $50 million to my offshore account using your biometrics. Then I leave." "And the fraud documents regarding David Chen?" Richard asked, sweating in the cold air. "I release them anyway." She smiled cruelly. "Consider it a parting gift. I burn you. I burn Ilara, and I burn the legacy of that brat she's carrying." Richard looked at the scanner. He realized then that he had a choice. He could save his own life, or he could save the company that belonged to his unborn child. He leaned forward as if to comply, but instead of speaking the authorization code, he shouted, "Security override! Code red!" "What are you doing?" Jessica screamed, striking him across the temple with the pistol. Blood trickled down his face, blinding him in one eye. "Authorize it or I'll blow your kneecaps off." "No," Richard groaned, looking up at her with defiance he hadn't felt in years. "I won't let you win. I'd rather die than let you destroy my family." Jessica cocked the gun, her eyes wild with panic and rage. "Have it your way." Crash! The corrugated metal roof exploded inward. Blinding floodlights cut through the gloom, and the deafening roar of a helicopter shook the dust from the rafters. "Drop the weapon! Blackwood security!" A voice boomed from the speakers. Before Jessica could react, the side doors were breached. A tactical team swarmed the room, red laser sights painting Jessica's chest. She shrieked and threw the gun across the floor, dropping to her knees. The thugs were subdued instantly. As the dust settled, a figure walked through the open bay doors. It wasn't a soldier. It was Ilara. She wore a trench coat over her hospital scrubs, looking pale, but terrifyingly regal. She walked straight up to Richard, ignoring the chaos. "You," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and relief. "You absolute noble idiot. You got yourself kidnapped?" "I had to stop her," Richard gasped as a medic cut his zip ties. "She has the files, Ilara. She sent them to the press. The fraud. It's going to ruin us." "He's right," Jessica yelled as the officers handcuffed her. "It's too late. The emails are out. The world knows Richard stole the company from a dead man." Ilara turned slowly to Jessica. She didn't look worried. She looked bored. "You mean these files?" Ilara pulled a folded document from her pocket. "You sent them to the press, yes. But Blackwood Holdings owns the controlling stake in every major news outlet in Seattle. Your leak was flagged and deleted 5 minutes ago." Jessica's face went white. "But the fraud is still real. You can't hide it forever." "I didn't hide it," Ilara said calmly. "I fixed it." She stepped closer to Jessica, ensuring Richard could hear every word. "I audited the books months ago. I saw the discrepancy with David Chen. So I flew to Ohio 3 weeks ago and met his mother. I bought the retroactive rights to the code for $5 million and set up a trust for her grandchildren. Mrs. Chen signed a full waiver." Richard stared at Ilara, stunned. "You fixed it, before you even knew if I would sell the company." "I fixed it because I didn't want the father of my child to be a criminal," Ilara said softly. "The IP is clean, Richard. Jessica has nothing but a kidnapping charge." As the police dragged a screaming Jessica away, Richard slumped against the table. He felt small. He had tried to be the hero, but Ilara had been the mastermind all along. He dropped to his knees, looking up at her. "I don't deserve you. I never did." Ilara looked down at him, her expression softening. "No, you didn't. You were arrogant and blind. But tonight, you were willing to die to protect us." She reached out her hand. "Forgiveness is a process, Richard. You have a long road ahead. You have to earn your place in this company and in this family. Are you ready to do the work?" Richard took her hand, holding it like a lifeline. "I'll work in the mailroom if I have to. Just let me be there." "Let's go home," Ilara said, pulling him to his feet. "We have a board meeting in the morning. And get a bandage for that head. You can't intimidate the Pentagon looking like you lost a bar fight." Richard laughed, a sound of pure relief. They walked out into the cool night air, leaving the past in the rusted warehouse. Richard Sterling had lost his fortune, but he had found his partner. And this time, he knew exactly what she was worth. And that is the story of how Richard Sterling lost a wife, but found a queen. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding everything together. Richard chased the illusion of power and almost lost the real thing, a partner who loved him for who he was, not what he had. It took losing everything for him to realize that true wealth isn't in the bank account. It's in loyalty, integrity, and the people who stand by you when the world turns its back. Ilara showed us that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's success, and sometimes the grace to offer a second chance to those who finally learn their lesson. What do you think? Did Richard deserve that second chance? Or should Ilara have left him in the dust and raised the baby alone? If you were Ilara, would you have saved him after everything he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma, twists, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a mafia boss who falls for a mute florist, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.